A tall, quietly spoken, modestly behaving, non-smoking, non-drinking man is in a living room lined with books. A young-ish, wet behind the ears gay journalist for a paper called Gay News in London is ready to interview, but he's not come to interview the man, he's come to interview somebody else. The man apologizes, says, could you just give me a minute, just give me a minute. Oh, who am I talking to, dear? The young journalist says, well, I'm from Gay News. Oh, that's a paper for happy people, is it? I'm talking to Dame Edna Everage, aka Barry Humphries, aka Les Patterson, aka Sandy Stone. It's an extraordinary moment for me because I realise that this man is no longer a man. He is a middle-aged woman who began her career as a housewife in Humoresque Street, Mooney Ponds, a suburb of Melbourne. And she is now a housewife superstar. She is drawing audiences to her shows where she's giving out advice, beauty secrets, fashion advice, cooking advice, and love advice. And here I am from Gay News asking her about her attitude to gays. She says, well, the thing is today, of course, they come up to you in the street and say, oh, excuse me, I'm terribly sick. So I think, oh, this is a bit difficult, isn't it? You've got someone here who's a little bit, shall we say, old-fashioned, but no, she's a modern mother because her son Kenny left home, left the nest, and is now living with a lovely chap called Cliff. And they run a little shop selling flowers, plants, called the Brown Thumb. It used to be called the Green Finger, but someone else had called their shop that, so it's now called the Brown Thumb. As you can tell, the conversation was unusual. You don't usually talk to a man who is channeling a woman, and a woman so extraordinary that she became not just a superstar, but a mega star. Edna Everage, one of the most terrifying women I've ever met. I would put her in the category with the other two most terrifying women I've ever met, Mary Whitehouse and Margaret Thatcher. And according to Dame Edna, Margaret would ring her for advice on her image. And it is noticeable that as Margaret grew in stature, first as the leader of the Conservative Party and then the Prime Minister, she did adopt a sort of Dame Edna-ish hairstyle and the clothes and the attitude. So maybe Dame Edna was right, that she did actually create Margaret Thatcher. Why are these women so terrifying? Well, the thing is that they are up here and you are down there. They make you feel very, very small indeed. And it was always noticeable that however much I tried to keep a straight face, I always ended up screaming and doubled up with laughter when I was talking to Dame Edna, i.e. Barry Humphries. I met Dame Edna herself, i.e. properly dressed, about 2 years later when Barry was appearing in a second show in the West End. By this time, I'm afraid Kenny and Cliff had split up, but they were still very good friends. Edna was so hoping that a grandchild would be coming along, but she said, he just needs time. He's only about 25. This, you see, was a woman. This wasn't a man in drag. This was a woman with drives and juices. She'd had 3 children. She'd had a husband called Norm, and Norm was now in the repatriation hospital with his prostate. He'd had terrible problems with his prostate, and she thought the best thing would be to put him in the repatriation home because, well, their marriage had always been a little bit difficult. He and another man named Doug Alsop were away at the war, and she and her bridesmaid, Madge, got very, very close during the war. I mean, what else is a bridesmaid for but to have a little bit of cuddle? Now, Dame Edna was at great pains to tell me that although this was lesbianism, it wasn't lesbianism that leaves a nasty taste in your mouth. So whenever she said to Madge, as she did in the past, come on Madge, let's have a little bit of lesbianism. She changed it to, come on Madge, let's have a little bit of a cuddle. And she said, what's better than a nice little cuddle with your bridesmaid on those cold Melbourne nights when your husband's in the repatriation hospital with his prostate. It was 1976, and there wasn't a lot to laugh about in the gay world at that time. There was lots about age of consent, lots about people being arrested, lots about lesbians losing children in custody battles. So it was very, very refreshing to have someone like Barry Humphries appear in gay news. He was a big star by that time, and the fact that he was willing not just to be interviewed, but to actually write that he wanted the gay news readers to send him requests for advice and information. He was very happy to answer their inquiries about all sorts of things, because as she said, I'm a modern mother, very broad-minded, and don't fear that anything you say will shock me. Although she does, she said, find this emphasis on sex a little bit overpowering. She said, it's not just in the men's magazines, it's in the women's magazines as well, as if women would be interested in sex. She said there was too much emphasis on homosexual acts and heterosexual acts. She and Norm had not indulged in any acts for many, many years, and when they did, of course, it was always in the dark with their jammies on. Edna Everage was a gust of fresh air for gay news. It was a very successful interview. Of course, a lot of people went to her show, and she was only too pleased to be interviewed 2 years later. An example, I think, of an incredibly intelligent person, very well read, a great scholar. He was very, very interested in art and music, and his languaging was extraordinary. His wit, his fast repartee, nothing could ever stop him from answering back. I think he did a lot of preparation for our interview. I don't think it was totally spontaneous, but he was the Edna that we would all see on stage and later, of course, on television and in some films, with that lovely sense of backhanded compliments and insults under that carapace of sweetness and light. What a wonderful, wonderful housewife superstar, megastar, goddess, saint, squillionairess, and I had a private audience with her on that Thursday morning in March.